Yeah, the one thing I've never gotten used to, even though Ed's 9, is the amount of people, complete strangers even, who feel that they can give you advice about childbirth. When you walk through the streets with a pregnant woman, you go to the shops with an infant child, the amount of people who feel that they're entitled to give you advice about how to raise that child, how to have that child. There's still somebody now in our local supermarket, drives Ali up the wall because she constantly says, well, you've got to have another child, you know, you can't have an only child, it's not fair to... It's like, it's none of your business. We raise our child as that. Yeah. And the whole terrible thing with parents, two sets of parents who clearly love you dearly, but all the way through the pregnancy feel honour bound to tell you in exact detail what things were like in their day, how things are not as good in nowadays, how... You know, the childbirth thing is blah, blah. You just get bombarded by advice, and you don't know which... And so much of it's contradictory, you don't know where to turn. You've got the National Childbirth Trust telling you one way to raise your child. You've got your internet class telling you another way to raise your child. You've got nature and instinct telling you that you do it this way. You've got grandparents. Your head explodes in the end.
I think the other thing is that they tend to descend on you suddenly. Oh. Yeah, you've got this exhaustion. You're absolutely tired. You think, right, quiet moment now, baby's down. I think the other big thing is that my wife and I were both quite strict about it, is that we didn't want everybody picking up the baby. Yeah. Yeah. Unless they'd wash their hands. We're quite anal about that. We're like, if you wash your hands, don't kiss the baby on the face because, you know, this kind of, you know, they can pick, you know, very early stage they can pick everything up. So
I could never have told my mum that.
I know, but we were really conscious of it. For some reason, it had to be so conscious that, you know,
somebody said that to you?
Yeah, the midwives have said, look, we're careful when they pick up the baby, they come in, especially if they've been stroking cats and all kinds of different things. But the scary thing about, I can't remember what the disease is called, when you touch a cat and then touch a baby and that type of thing. We were kind of paranoid with our first child. We were like, hold on a second, this is it, this is precious. You know, no way are we going to let anything happen. So we were like, when someone came in, like, oh, show us the baby, we said, would you mind washing your hands? I know it sounds really daft, but we were like that. The other thing is that everyone turned up. Brothers, sisters, aunts, da-da-da-da. It was like, oh,
with good intentions as well.
Great intentions. But you know, in your first 2 weeks, you're just like...
It is that whirlwind though, isn't it? It's every minute the doorbell rings and somebody new is coming through the door, and you feel bad by saying... And eventually we had to say, look, we're going to have a couple of days on our own, and sorry grandparents and sorry friends.
And it's that whole in-laws v in-laws thing as well, isn't it? About, you know, it's a bit of competition. Was that what she said?
Even now we get that now. Is that the different ways that both sets of grandparents have that they're on raising children and sending them to school. It's that whole... you wanted to go to that school, do you? Well, this doesn't help what you think, it's what we think. But was it easier for you when you had the second and third child? Did it become more automatic?
Much more relaxed. I mean, again, you know, poor old Verity's probably been left on shelves and goodness knows what over the years. Oh, there she is. It was number 3. You know, she's just going to make do men kind of thing. And she had, but again, we sort of talked about how the different dynamic and how their characters have changed. But number 3 is so different to number 1 because number 1 had absolutely everything, as you say, poured into her from hand washing to God knows what. And as you say, number 3 has been probably picking up dirt and cows, whatever, and all the rest of it.
Seriously, big immunities.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great immunity probably as a result of it, but yeah.
I do have to say, the one piece of advice that I think stuck, because you do get bombarded, and I went to every antenatal class and I took notes and I was really into that, and all of it went out of my head completely as soon as the situation arises. The one piece of advice, and I've actually lived by this, but we had a child psychologist came to an antenatal class who said to us that there's no such thing as a bad baby, that children aren't evil, that if they're crying, it's because they're hungry, they're sick, or they're wet. So if you've dealt with all those things, the child won't cry. And a child hasn't got the sense to think, oh, I'm going to be a bit mischievous, I'll keep them awake. And that was a really important piece of advice, because then you think, oh, great, OK, the child's crying, that's a signal that something's wrong, let's find out what it is, sort it out. Then they're happy, smiley. Then that meant I was far more relaxed going into being a parent than I was. I was still a nervous wreck. I mean, part of me still is a nervous wreck, but that really helped the first few days when you have got this tiny vulnerable thing in your lovely flat that you don't know how to look after. That was constantly in the back of my mind.
And we had the same advice with antenatal. If he's crying, it's because he needs his nappy change, he's sick, or he's not eating properly. But the problem was there was no midwife or health visitor that would actually say, let's move on to the bottle. And this whole breastfeeding, bottle feeding thing was like a complete nightmare. You read websites and you'd almost feel like you're better off starving him than taking him off the breast. And in the end, I sort of said to Karen, and maybe it was easy for me because I'd been with Kirsty when Kirsty was born, and this was Karen's first, so I'd kind of been there before, so maybe
That's
I was a
an
little bit
interesting
more,
experience,
a little bit more at ease with it. And I said, well, he needs feeding. Just get him some SMA or get him some powder milk and go for it.
And it's amazing how quickly they take to the powder milk. Because
Yeah.
then you go, hold on a second, they weren't getting what they needed. Obviously, they were hungry because they take to these bottles.
But then women feel guilty about that, which is awful,
which was
isn't
the whole cycle with Karen, and she wasn't sleeping properly because of the breastfeeding. He wasn't taking as much breast, so he was up every hour. And she was just completely knackered. And then the guilt sets in with yourself. But then when he was on bottled milk, and I could take some of the pressure off at night, and then she had calmed down a bit, which in turn made Harry calm down a bit. And we're all a nice, happy family now.
I feel so sorry for women now, especially because they're so surrounded by conflicting advice. And one of the things that me and Ali always talked about was like, nature is the most powerful thing in the world. And like instinctively, you should know what to do and what's best for your kid. And she says, I know that, but when you pick up a magazine or you turn on the television and there's so many programs saying one thing, you've got to breastfeed or you can't breastfeed, they've got to be off the breast at 3 months, you can't have them in your bed, you must have them in your bed. You can't, I don't know what to do for the best. I think there's a lot of pressure from other parents as well, because you do get, parents will say to you, oh, when did he start walking? You say, oh, I don't know, oh, well, mine was walking a month ahead of yours.
Well, there's trends now, there's different books that come out every year. Just going back to the old in-laws one, which is quite interesting as well, I just wondered how, in terms of the relationship of the in-laws to the child, we were talking earlier as well about the sort of different relationships we have with our parents and things like that, how that differs, because my father's relationship to my children, his grandchildren, is incredibly different. I look at him sort of with my girls now, and I think, well, you were never like that. And he's got a really good relationship, and there is a sort of an interesting dynamic between the in-laws and the actual children.
It's funny, I feel really sorry for Ali's parents live in Birmingham, which is it's not the end of the world, but it's when we're both working and it's kind of different. So they don't see Ed any more than probably 3 or 4 times a year. So every time they see him, he's older. But my dad, my mum was away nursing her parents when Ed was born. My dad was living with us. You've never seen a closer relationship between a child and his grandparent. They're both absolutely obsessed with each other, which is fantastic. But the only downside is that we can't ask anybody else to look after him, because both of them get cross. So sometimes he's not available, so it's really difficult. It's fantastic at one point, so he's always there to look after him. But if he's not there, we can't go out.